Yosemite, and passing around is there's a sign-in list if anyone wants to be on my mailing list, and you can all, if you, Vanessa was saying most people have donated to my campaign already, so thank you. So if you've donated, you're on the list. If you would like to get on the mailing list, that's Vanessa has it, and then also we have little sheets with my bio on it in case anyone doesn't know what I've done with my life, and it also has links to all my social media accounts, so you can send your friends, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, put out my crowdfunding page to all of your friends and family and say, oh my gosh, we need to save Yosemite. So before I get into the talk, I want to give you guys a sense of the district that I'm running in, since a lot of you aren't from it. So this is California's 4th district. We are standing in it right now. It goes from the suburbs of Sacramento all the way up Highway 50 and 80 to include the towns of Auburn and Truckee, all the way up to Lake Tahoe at the Nevada border. It goes then all the way south along the Sierras through Yosemite and through Kings Canyon and stops at the outskirts of Fresno. So it also includes all these foothill counties as well, like Calaveras County and Amador County. So it's 10 counties total, and it's a huge chunk of Northern California. And the district includes folks who are in a rural area, folks who are in suburbs, and folks who are retired from the Bay Area to escape into the mountains. So it's a very mixed demographic where we're struggling with a lot of rural poverty, where people are cash poor and land rich, and a lot of elderly who have moved into these areas. So it's a very diverse district with a lot of issues. Now Tom McClintock, the current representative, he is a very far-right Republican. He's part of the Tea Party, and he gets a score of voting for Trump 93% of the time, to give you a sense of where he is on the political scale. He is someone who has proposed legislation to commercialize Yosemite, and he is actually very powerful in terms of what happens with our national parks and our federal land, because he's on the Natural Resources Committee, which is where all those decisions get made as to the resources for our federal land and how it will be used. He is someone who has advocated for clear cutting of logs of our forests, and he has also advocated for removing the protections along the Merced and Tuolumne rivers right here, so that they could be dammed lower down or mined. So that gives you a sense of his position on environmental issues, and so all of you love Yosemite, and so part of the reason I'm running is to be able to protect Yosemite and Lake Tahoe and the Sierras, which I love. As most of you know, I've actually hiked this entire district on the Pacific Crest Trail and the John Muir Trail, some of it with Kaylin, who is right there, Kaylin, where I've hiked from Sierra City outside of north of Tahoe all the way down. It's about 500 miles to Mount Whitney. So Tom McClintock, who is the current representative, cannot claim that he has hiked the entire district, but I can. So who's ready to help me save Yosemite? Yeah. So I am a 5th generation Northern Californian. My great-great-grandparents came over on covered wagons and landed in the Sierra foothills in a little town called Gold Run in this district, outside of the town of Auburn. And my sister and I still are stewards of about 50 acres of that original family land. And it is beautiful, pristine forest. And so we understand what sustainable land management looks like and what it means to preserve land for generations, because that's what our great-grandparents did for us. All of you knew my mother, and my mother instilled in me a deep commitment to service because, as you all know, she basically defined the term. And so we would spend our weekends and evenings working and volunteering for the church and the youth groups and at local nursing homes and cleaning up creeks and rivers and out hiking on these trails. And And to my mother's dismay, I took my commitment to public service, and I went global. So I was dedicated to the idea of really helping the world, because what I learned early on from my mom is that a service-driven life is a purpose-filled life. And I loved the deep meaning I got from having our life be in service to others. So I went global with this idea, and my first gig was with Save the Children in Ethiopia. And I went out initially to work on famine relief work, and I was very quickly redirected to, I went out initially to work on education, and I was redirected to famine relief work. And one of my first days out, I went to a village where people were within 2 weeks of starving, and we were bringing them to a UN feeding center. And I helped a mother and her 5-year-old daughter into our vehicle, and I quickly discovered that they had been eating grass. And as I drove back through the countryside to get them to safety, I looked around at the landscape, and I realized that all of the fields were green. It was this lush, green, beautiful landscape. And I realized that it had rained, but just at the wrong time to water the crops, which is why everyone was starving. And that's when it hit me, that a famine isn't a natural disaster, it's a political disaster. And if it's a political disaster, then we can find a policy solution. And I decided right then and there that I was going to find the policy solutions and really work to help solve the underlying causes of famine and poverty and human struggle around the world, so that it doesn't continue. We can find permanent solutions to human problems. And I committed myself to that. And so when I graduated from college, I immediately was hired by USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, to help find these policy solutions to human struggles. And they took one look at me and said, "You look like Baghdad material," and sent me off to Iraq. And as you all know, I told my mom this was for her own spiritual growth. And I think many of you also grew spiritually. Thank you for those of you who were on the Baghdad prayer team. I came home in one piece, as you can see. But Iraq was a struggle. You know, I traveled, my first 6 months out there, I traveled all over the country documenting the impact of our aid programs on Iraqis. I saw what worked and what didn't. I was also out there traveling around side by side with our troops. I saw the sacrifices that our troops make and the sacrifices that their families make at home. One of my colleagues, I was by his side when his wife was having their first child, and he was in tears because the video connection that they had had on the computer went out, and he wasn't able to even be there remotely, and had to miss this. So I was there, and I saw firsthand the sacrifices people make. I also saw what makes a refugee. Many of my Iraqi colleagues who are standing side by side with me, working hard to stabilize their government and try to get our troops home, they were going through horrendous struggles where they were losing family members and risking their lives. And I watched my staff in Iraq, who were all wearing bright, beautiful, colorful clothes, start wearing the colors of mourning because they had all lost immediate members of their family. And by the end of my first 6 months out there, everyone was wearing black. So I saw what refugees go through and what they struggle and endure before they leave. The next year I spent in Iraq, I was working on trying to develop a civil service corps for Iraq's government, and was trying to develop a coalition within, found a partner in Iraq's government to take ownership of the project. I got the military on board. I brought all of these different groups together to focus our efforts on one activity, which was restaffing Iraq's government so that America and our troops could go home, so that they could take all their oil money and deliver services to their constituents and to the Iraqis, so that we could try to stabilize that country. And surprisingly, that particular project, in terms of staffing up Iraq's government, worked. The Iraqi government ran it with the U.S. government for about 10 years, and then they ended up liking it so well they purchased it from the U.S. And it was because I had found an Iraqi to take ownership of it, that a senior Iraqi official who took ownership of it, and it was able to, it was actually it succeeded in its own mission, even though the broader mission of Iraq, well, history will give us some results there. But one of the lessons that I learned from Iraq was actually when I came home on a break. Iraq, as you all know, is such a politically polarizing issue. And when I was out there, I was seeing the rise of the insurgency, and I was facing down Iraqi militias, which were destabilizing the country and would later morph into ISIS. And I understood right then that this was a problem we needed to fix, otherwise it would spill into the region and destabilize the whole area and be a bigger problem that we would still in the end have to solve because it would come back across the ocean to us. And so I came home for a rest break, and I was thinking that everyone was going to be incensed and motivated to try to figure out how to solve the problem of Iraq's militias and the insurgency that was raging. And I sat on a 4th of July holiday on a golf course in between two cousins who watched different news channels, different cable news channels. One of them told me all about the Iraqis and their newfound freedom and the Saddam Hussein trial, and wanted to know how Iraqis were enjoying the spoils of democracy. And the other one was asking me all about WMDs and who had lied about them and who was to blame. And neither of them even mentioned or had heard about the insurgency, which I felt was the real problem that we needed to face as a nation. And I looked at them and I said, trying to describe Iraq through a red lens or a blue lens is like trying to describe a rainbow using two colors. You miss the bigger picture. And if you miss the bigger picture, you can't see the problem. And if you can't see the problem, you can't solve the problem. So today, as I look around at our political environment, I feel like we're in that same situation we were, where we are missing solutions and we're not clearly identifying problems because we are looking at issues through political lenses. And political lenses distort challenges that impact our community every day and impact our lives directly. And I have dedicated my life to solving some of the world's toughest challenges, and I've never backed down because they're hard or because it's tricky. And I have faced every Goliath that I have seen head on and run straight into it because I felt like there was a bigger mission, and that was service to our country and service to our community. So I have served my country all over the world, whether it was in Burma or in Iraq or in Ethiopia or in Nepal or in India, working on nuclear nonproliferation or stabilizing defense relationships. I have worked every day to make our world more stable, safer, and stronger for Americans who live here. Because when the world prospers, America prospers. Migration pressures ease, our goods are cheaper, and our troops get to stay at home. And that's what I've been fighting for. And so now I'm back in my own community, because our community needs a real advocate and someone who is going to look past the politics and dig into the solutions and find solutions that are going to make our community stronger, more stable, and safer. So I am thrilled to be here representing all this huge, vast swath of Northern California that I have tromped all over and love at my very core. And in particular, I get to represent Yosemite. So I'm so excited to have you all on my team to help me save our park, and let's get to it. So I am happy to answer questions and talk about some of my policy positions. And I'll give you guys a couple of hint questions in case anyone wants to plant them. So a lot of people like to ask why I'm running now. And you might want to ask some questions about specific stuff for the park and the forests, because I just learned a lot about that. And I'm always happy to talk foreign policy, because that's kind of my wheelhouse. Happy to talk a little bit about my resume, although I think most of you know it. And yeah, so happy to ask. I don't normally plant questions with an audience, but I figured you guys you're my family, so whatever you would like. Yeah, so what questions do you guys have?
What's the biggest imminent threat to the park that you found out about?
Yes, I think Tom McClintock is. All right, Rocky asked, "What's the biggest imminent threat to the park?" And I think it's Tom McClintock. Yeah, commercializing Yosemite would be detrimental. You know, we already have a lot of commercial ventures going on here, which probably wouldn't fly today, but it damages the ecosystem and the ecology. The park is already overcrowded based on what you guys can see about traffic and us trying to get campsites over the years. We've seen the density in the park increase. So big threats to the park are, and the forest in general, beetle kill. We have 100 million dead trees in the Sierra Nevadas, and it is ravaging, and they're dying for 3 reasons. One was the drought, which caused all of our trees to be weak. Another reason was that our forests were too dense. Back in the early 1900s, we had the Comstock lode come in. It was a gold mining operation and silver mining operation that wiped out all of the old growth forests. So we used to have these healthy, dense forests with upper canopies and lower trees down below. They got wiped out, and when you clear cut a forest, they grow back overly dense. And then what happened is that the Park Service and the federal government decided to take a strategy of fire suppression rather than fire prevention. And so the natural fires that would have actually thinned out that forest and allowed it to grow back with better tree density were completely suppressed under our Smokey the Bear policy. And so as a result, you know, you've been hiking in these areas where you've seen a dense forest, where you get in and you're like, oh, this is really dark, all the trees are really skinny, their branches are all broken off at the bottom, and that is an unhealthy, overly dense forest. And so figuring out how to thin it out is critical. The last reason that our trees have been dying off by bark beetle is that usually every winter the low temperature, it stays below freezing for a couple weeks at a time, and that kills off the bugs. We have been having a warming trend, and so that is impacting not only Yosemite, but all of the forests, where you are actually seeing now the dead trees. Like I was just in Mariposa giving a talk to constituents there. We had the trees die off over the last year, endangering everybody's homes. And causing huge fire dangers, and the trees are likely not coming back because now the climate is too warm for pine trees in those areas. And so what people moved into, a mixed oak pine forest, is now going to be rolling oak woodland, and they're not quite sure how to manage and protect rolling oak woodland because it's never been there before. And so we're seeing climate change in action. You know, they say, oh, the trees are moving north. Well, the trees don't just pick up their roots and walk, they die, and then they don't come back. And so we're seeing a huge transformation in California, where our entire structure and scape of our landscape is shifting, and we have to figure out how to adapt and work with that to protect property, to protect land, and to maintain it. I mean, even consequences you don't think about, like a lot of the flooding we experienced this year. You know, a lot of that could have was exacerbated by having the dead trees not there to soak up the water. You used to have all of these root systems being sponges, and instead the water was running off and causing more flooding downstream. So we have to really be careful about and alert to looking at our systems as ecological. And Tom McClintock, who is on the Natural Resource Committee, isn't thinking that way. He is thinking about how you can maximize the money from these areas right now without asking, what can we do to help people live off of this land and enjoy it, but have it stick around for 100 years? You know, our family's property is still healthy because our cousins and our grandparents would log it every 20 years. They would do selective logging, pull out certain trees, and it allowed our forest to have a good, healthy forest density. And we're not seeing that consistently, and that needs to change. Chris Cheney.
You mentioned early on about your experience in Ethiopia and the famine, and that you are solution-oriented. And I wondered, since you had envisioned for that type of famine,
Yeah, there was actually a good solution proposed that summer, and we haven't seen intense famines in Ethiopia really since. An economist named Jeffrey Sachs came in, and the challenge with Ethiopia, the reason no one was investing in irrigation and water storage on their property was that it was all public land. So everyone living, Ethiopia was a socialist country, and so everyone, the land was owned by the government, and so the communities had no incentive to invest in the land they were living on because it could get taken away anytime. So Jeffrey Sachs came in and said land ownership and titles are critical, and so he negotiated with the government of Ethiopia to give people 100-year leases, which would be tradable, and they could use those leases as capital and collateral to get loans, so that they could then take that to a bank. We worked on banking systems there as well. They could take that to a bank, get money back to be able to invest in the irrigation systems they needed. So asking what the underlying issue was, which was no land titles, was what helped us. And it's funny, I'm going to pivot here for a second. When I think about that concept, that how critical it is to have land titles for an economy so that you can get capital, it makes me think about our current college education system, where most of our students are emerging with debts that are about the size of a home mortgage. And so as a result, they are not able to get home mortgages because their incomes for 20 to 30 years are going into paying off student loans as opposed to buying homes. And the economist Fernando de Soto pointed out that about 80% of America's small businesses started with home mortgages, home loans, or home titles used as collateral to get your bank loan for your business. And so you think about the drag that puts on our economy. So it's sort of like translating this lesson I learned in Ethiopia to our current situation here, where you ask, well, our drag on our economy is that students are coming out with this massive debt to get their college education, and it's having this huge slowing effect down the line because they are not able to take the money they're earning and put it towards innovation, ideas, and entrepreneurship. Instead, they're having to put it towards really high rate student loans. So that whole structure really needs to shift. Other questions? Laura?
I have two.
Okay, I might answer one.
Okay.
I'll answer.
One is about, I'll give you both questions, okay. One is,
I'm gonna drink.
as in your position as a congresswoman, how would you see overcoming incredible partisanship in Congress? Mm-hmm. And the other one is, what is your concept, or what do you think the best solution is for the healthcare?
What's that second part?
Repeat the question.
Laura wants to know how we're going to overcome partisanship and what I want to do about healthcare. So, easy ones. Yeah. So, with partisanship, I think the key is framing. And because a lot of times we are speaking past each other with language that people have different definitions for different things. And so I am committed to not using buzzwords, when talking to mixed crowds. Although I mentioned climate change today, so I'll have to work on that. But let me give you an example. So there was the climate march a few months ago, and I went out to Lake Tahoe with a little sign that said, "Support our troops with science." And my message for everyone was, even if, like Tom McClintock, the current representative, doesn't believe in climate change. But what that means is that he's making decisions that have ramifications on the economy and the health of this community that have huge ramifications whether or not he believes in climate change. So let me give you an example of that. So when I was in Iraq, I saw that most of our military, all of our military bases, operate on gasoline generators. Now, to get gasoline out to a forward operating base, it costs between $100 to $600 a gallon, depending on where the base is. So it's a huge cost that our military is putting in just to power these generators. The other cost is in lives. At the height of the war in Iraq, from 2004 to 2009, we lost 3,000 Americans transporting fuel out to bases. So the military has taken a step back and they have said, it is a huge burden on us to be using fossil fuels. We need to have our bases self-sufficient and energy independent. So the military has made this huge shift where they are investing in renewable energy constantly and trying to find scalable and portable renewable energy at every level now of our U.S. strategy. They are investing in biofuels for our Navy. We have the Great Green Fleet, which is a naval fleet which runs on biofuels. The Air Force is committed to using 50% biofuel blends by 2020. We have these huge investments happening. Now, the military is getting these investments, though, for the renewables that they are buying up are coming from small innovations that have started with grants from the Department of Energy. Trump's current budget, because he doesn't believe in climate change, cut the climate change division, which was the renewable energy grant division for the Department of Energy. So what Trump essentially did, and McClintock cheered him on, was he cut the supply chain for the military to get renewable energies out to our bases to save American lives and to liberate us. And I mean, the consequences of using fuel depending on gas generators on military bases, it's terrible. Like, I was out on a base when our tanker truck was hit and we were stranded without fuel for 4 days. We pared the generator down to just communications and keeping some food fresh, and we all started to get heat stroke. I mean, I was so hot I found a refrigerator and sat in it for a little while, but nearly got shot because the poor army guy who opened the poor soldier who opened the door was not expecting someone just to be chilling on a box of water bottles in the fridge, and he pulls out his M6 at me and puts it in my face, and it wasn't loaded because we were on base, but it was startling, and I politely handed him a water bottle and left. But it makes everybody really vulnerable, because when you're struggling in 130-degree heat without air conditioning for 4 days, everyone started getting a heat stroke. And it was okay for me because I was staying on the base, but for our troops, they still had to go out on missions. So they had to go out in harm's way while they are not operating sort of at their height of alertness. And so there are huge consequences for voting against good policy in the name of saying, to get a political win with a particular base by saying, we're going to go against climate change. I saw Tom McClintock just do this. For example, he tweeted out, congratulations to Donald Trump for stepping out of the Paris Accords, and he said this is going to support working families. Well, the biggest employer in our district are the ski resorts around Lake Tahoe. And the ski resorts around Lake Tahoe are really panicking because the temperature, the average low temperature last year was 34 degrees. It's a $5 billion industry that's the largest employer in the district. So all of the working families who live in our district are impacted by the rising temperature that is happening in Tahoe right now. And so Tom McClintock came out and said, let's support working families by stepping out of the Paris Accords. And I say, what about the working families in Tahoe, Tom McClintock? What about the working families who are concerned about dead trees falling on their homes? And he's actively, in the name of a partisan idea, voted against actively looking for solutions to problems that impact us here and impact our troops and impact the security of our country.
And helpful is, how do we bridge this gap, not from an Iraq perspective, but within Congress? How do you get people working together again? Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. Sort of, we as individuals need to start bridging the gap ourselves, right? Not I'm committed. You never shame somebody for voting for Trump, or never shame someone for voting for McClintock. Keep your doors wide open and welcome everyone in based on good ideas, and say, hey, what's your problem? I went to a festival in Roseville the other day, and I just stood out in front of a booth and I said, hi, I'm Jessica, I'm running for Congress. What's your issue? How can I help? And so really focusing on local impact makes a big difference and allows you to have a communication space. I found on like on Facebook, for example, one of my cousins was really into sort of the Trump conspiracy theories, and I said, he put up something about Pizzagate saying, isn't this terrible that Hillary Clinton had a sex trafficking ring, and we need to really stop this. And rather than getting involved in the conspiracy, I asked myself what the underlying issue was that he was outraged about. Like, what is it, other than Hillary Clinton, what is it that was getting him outraged? And so I wrote back to him and I said, hey, it looks like you're really concerned about human trafficking. Human trafficking is a really serious issue. Here's 4 organizations in your community that are doing something about human trafficking. You should get involved. And then I sent him a book and I said, hey, I read this book in college and it helped me break up a human trafficking ring in Iraq because I recognized the signs and I knew what to do. And he wrote back and said, that's a great idea. My wife and I will volunteer for this at Christmas, and I'm looking forward to reading this book. And so it gave me, being able to sort of redirect that energy to something that is real and productive is critical, and we need to be alert to that. Now, how am I going to go work with congressional representatives? Most of you know that I grew up as a Republican and a fiscal conservative. And so I am going to be framing things in terms of what makes good budgetary sense. And so I'm going to give them talking points and ideas that will resonate with their constituency, but be good ideas. And as I don't know if you guys know that I worked on the federal budget for a few years. So I have a lot of really policy wonky ideas that can actually save our government a lot of money without cutting critical programs. People say, oh, we need to cut Meals on Wheels. I say we'd actually save a lot more money if instead of doing 1-year appropriations where all of our federal agencies have this September 30th scramble to spend all of their money because they have to lose it at the end of the year, we give them 5-year appropriations so that they can spend their money wisely in budget for the programs that are going to make the most sense. And you'd save tremendous amount of money because you wouldn't lose all this money in useless furniture and contracts that you don't need because they're just looking for a place to put it because what they had intended to use it for wasn't available by the September 30th artificial deadline. And so, there are a lot of ways to save money and be fiscally responsible without necessarily cutting things that provide good quality of life and address underlying issues within our community. So, healthcare. Healthcare is a huge issue in our district. Tom McClintock voted in support of the ACHA, the Obamacare repeal, and the consequence, the rough numbers, how accurate they are, I do not know. So I'll be looking for the more solid numbers. But the initial estimate that came out was that we have 450,000 voters in this district. The healthcare repeal is going to jeopardize 200,000 people may lose their healthcare. And everywhere I go, that's the first question everybody asks. Because frankly, healthcare just isn't a good business model. A lot of the issues we struggle with in this district are rural hospitals. So we had a rural hospital in Auburn, and it was independent, and it provided all of the services to people within about a 4-hour radius of it. And it got bought out by Sutter, and it ended up losing its maternity ward. So now women that would have had to have driven, 1 or 2 hours to get down to a maternity ward have to drive all the way into pretty much Sacramento or drive up to Reno to deliver their baby. And so it's not providing the emergency services that people need. Placerville is fighting to keep its rural hospital because they don't want to end up in a situation where people are stranded without care. Mariposa is fighting to keep its rural hospital, and they're increasing pressure because the park here actually closed down its clinic, so suddenly people from the park are having to drive to Mariposa, and it strains the hospital. Oakhurst lost its hospital. Sonora lost its hospital. These areas are now stranded outside what's called the golden hour, the 1-hour radius that you need care by to meet that need. And so, so there may be some opportunities for you guys to go talk Christian Science in these communities because people are stranded, essentially. And it's because it's not a business model, but health is a good model. Investing in human capital is something that every good company does. It's something that every good family does. You don't make sure your kids are healthy and educated because it's going to have return investments for you and it's going to be profitable for you. You do it because you know it's going to make them successful and effective down the line, and then they'll take care of you in their old age. So, I mean, if you want to put an economic model in there, it's important for us to have a healthy and educated working population because they're going to generate more tax base. And so my plan, and this gets to how do we work with Republicans, is I would like to see us work towards a single payer model, but right now it's too expensive if we just take the prices that we're paying insurance companies currently, and that because we're paying well, I don't want to quote numbers yet, but we're paying, a huge chunk of the population is already on subsidized or fully funded health care. And so you need to be able to close that gap, and we need to make it a reasonable price. So the first step to do that is what I would call a healthcare transparency bill. It's where you have pharmaceutical companies and hospitals open up their books, and then there's also a price control or a price transparency aspect of it too. So you'd look at a pharmaceutical company's books, and you would say, hey, is their price on those drugs, is it reflective of them having a monopoly, or is it reflective of the real research and development that it went into it? If they got a government grant, did they incorporate that into their prices? For hospitals, what's driving hospital prices up? You would be able to look and say, oh, is it the number of people coming in without insurance to use emergency rooms as their primary care, and that cost is then getting transferred throughout the rest of the hospital system, driving all of the prices up. So we have to ask ourselves, what is driving the prices up? And we have a lot of anecdotes and a lot of specific studies. We don't have a universal model to do that yet. And so in order to drive prices down, we need to see what the real costs of care are. And so price transparency model is the first step. I think that would pass with Republican colleagues. I think that's something that I could get across because it's looking at real finances. The other side of that, of a transparency bill, is price transparency, where there's no other model where you go into a system and you don't know where you're paying before you get the product. You don't go into a grocery store and get your milk and eggs and cheese and get home and get a bill for $2,000 2 months later and say, oh, the cheese was out of network. Shoot, but in hospitals that happens all the time. And so having ways for consumers to be able to know what they're paying up front and what those costs are is going to also help drive those prices down. And so then once we have the prices down, we should be able to make a similar investment to what we're making right now into healthcare, but have it be a universal system so that we can keep these rural hospitals open and we can keep access to healthcare as a value that our society has, because it's a good investment in our population. And it may not be a good investment right up front, but it's a good investment down the line. And to have a healthier population, there'd be a lot of emphasis on preventative care and on health as opposed to making money off of sickness. And so we need to reframe our entire system. And I think that sort of two-step approach of a transparency bill first would be good to do in 2018 when we'll still have some Republican in office, and then we can move on to a smart, well thought out, and well financed model to provide health across the board.
Are you running as a Republican?
I'm running as a Democrat. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm running as a Democrat. But I think that's sounds like I'm talking across the aisle. That's good.
What do you do? What's your plans for putting the people back to work, or how are they at work? Mm-hmm. I mean, economics seems to drive the electoral process.
Yeah, we have huge needs for jobs in this community. There's a lot of rural poverty going on, and it's a struggle. And the solutions in Tahoe are going to be different than the solutions in Roseville and different than the solutions down the line. I am very excited about some ideas I've been seeing about taking the problem we have with how do we get the 100 million dead trees out of the forest, and using that problem set as a way to get people back to work. So I've seen proposals for, and these are starting to become realities, for biofuel plants. Where people are taking the dead trees and turning them into biofuel, because they're a little bit riddled with fungus, and the beetle does something to the trees that it's not good for building. It's not good for timber, but it's great for biofuel. And so we're starting to get plants in that can turn all of these dead trees into local energy sources. They then take all the charcoal from the biofuel plant and put that into water treatment plants to help filter the water. So there's a lot of opportunities for for green energy and renewable energy, and looking at our problems as solutions. And it's going to be county specific. I had an interesting conversation the other day with a county supervisor in Calaveras County, who is seeing a rise in wineries, which are about a $3 million a year industry for the county. Cattle, which is a classic industry out there, which is about a $9 million a year industry. But now that there's licenses available for medicinal marijuana in California, cannabis has become a $350 million a year industry in Calaveras County. And so, and as a result, in Calaveras, they are seeing people buy up land that was burnt out by the Butte fire, and land that would be essentially have no value. And these farmers are buying it up. They are hiring construction crews, and so there's also a construction industry now starting in Calaveras County. The schools are filling back up again because all these folks are coming in with families and kids. And so Calaveras is finding it very revitalizing. Amador County doesn't want anything to do with it. And so we might need to find other job solutions for them. But, there are a lot of opportunities for each county to find new innovative industries to get people back to work. But getting people to work is going to be a critical goal for meeting the needs of these communities, and finding ways for the federal government to make that easier and more transparent, and remove the barriers in the economy. It really allows people to get back to work and revitalize these communities.
Plant question.
Plant question, yeah.
Why are you running now, and why are you running for a national office instead of starting a local county office?
Yeah, thanks, sister. That's a great question. Yeah, so as many of you know, I've always wanted to run for office. I believe I had a conversation with Melanie Devlin along the banks of the Merced when I was in 4th grade, where she asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be in Congress. And we were had fistfuls of mud and pyrite, and we decided to build my congressional strategy, and she was going to be on my team. And so it's always this commitment to public service has always been at my core, and I've always thought about coming home and running. And this last election, though, really sped things up. As many of you know, I worked on the Hillary campaign out in Colorado, and I was really devastated. When Trump won, I had called up the Clinton campaign when Trump said that he was going to give nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia, and I was like, wait, the world order that I have been working towards my entire life is going to crumble, and I didn't want to see World War III. So I tried to do everything to mitigate that, but I saw how not just with Hillary Clinton, but with a local congressional candidate that I was supporting in Colorado, I saw women running for office and being just torn to pieces, and I felt like their works were put in front of the equivalent of like a funhouse mirror. This woman was the Speaker of the Colorado State House, and had been a huge advocate and fought really hard to protect children from child predators. And she had voted down a weak bill and reworked the legislation so that it was stronger. Well, her opposition said, look, she voted down a bill that was against child predators, so she supports child predators. And they distorted her, they just flipped all of her policies. And so everyone was going around saying, she's evil, she's evil. And I knew that she was really an outstanding worker. So I saw what happens to women. And I thought, how am I ever going to be able to move home and run for office and serve my community this way when women who step into the arena get distorted and torn apart in a way that is devastating. Like, who would do this to their lives, you know? And I had Thanksgiving with Kay, and her brother-in-law was working high up on the Trump campaign in Colorado, and he was also coming to Thanksgiving. And I decided.
I prayed through this thing.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. And
No slaughter. No slaughter allowed.
yeah. But I knew that he was that he's a nice man. And so rather than having the conversation at Thanksgiving, because all of you know that if I have questions about something, I need to ask them. And so rather than asking at Thanksgiving, I wrote to him and asked if he'd be willing to talk with me beforehand. And he graciously agreed. And so I had this lovely conversation with him where I asked him, how can I run for office when this is what happens to women? And he called it gotcha politics. And he said, gotcha politics is never going to change unless you have enough people with integrity who are willing to step up and run for office and don't have to win at the cost of losing their integrity. They don't have to win at any cost. And he said to me, Jessica, it's like the firefighters at 9/11. Everyone else was running away from the danger and they ran towards it. He said, this is your moment to run towards the danger because the system is never going to change unless you step up. And he was very encouraging about me running for office. He even gave me contacts from elected officials in the Colorado State Legislature that he had worked with who graciously agreed to sit down with me and give me tips. He said, here's Democrats that I know, here's Republicans I know, and you go talk with them about what it's like to be a woman running for office. And it was an incredible, encouraging moment where I realized that I was tired of the way politics is going right now. I was tired of the infighting. I was tired of the belittling. I was tired of the distractions where we don't see what's best for our community and fight for those solutions. And I then decided that I was going to run because I felt like when that initial wave of grief after the election subsided, I felt a fire inside of me. And I felt like I was being made into steel. And I thought, you know what, if I can survive Iraq, if I can hike 500 miles by myself, you know, if I can change August's poopy diaper from this morning, you know, it was a blowout. I can do anything. You know, I have been charging Goliaths my entire career, and I have never backed down because I felt like the mission was right, and I had my sense of integrity, and I know who I am, and I've never, ever been in a situation where I have wavered from my center. And I thought, this is what politics needs. Politics needs integrity, and it needs a commitment to our community, and it needs the willingness to listen across the aisle and work to find real solutions and bring people on board with sustainable solutions rather than political sound bites. And so that's why I decided to run now. And in terms of, you know, when McClintock started voting against our district left, right, and center, I thought, we need to stop this now. Yosemite's not going to be around if I wait a few more years and we let him stay in office. But I also realized that my entire career has actually been preparing me for this. That all of my work with the federal budget, going up in front of Congress and negotiating with the appropriations committees to stabilize our federal budget and make it more efficient was preparing me for the skill set that a congressman needs, which is the ability to figure out how to fight for a community and work with our budget. They haven't figured out how to pass one. I know how to pass a budget. You know, Congress works a lot on foreign policy. My whole career has been foreign policy and solving problems at the strategic level. That strategy is needed. So I realized that I actually already have the skill sets that most congressmen come in not having. And plus, I have deep roots in this community, and I know what it looks like, and I know what it means to really listen to solve problems. That's why I've been going town to town, talking to county supervisors, talking to constituents, figuring out what the real issues are that impact our community and how to solve them. So I am prepared to run for Congress. I am committed to run for Congress, and they can throw their worst at me, but I have my deep sense of integrity. This is who I am, and I'm going to fight for it. So I'm so glad that you're all here and on my team, and thank you for supporting me, and thank you for forging me into the woman that I am today, because I'm going to make sure that we get to have Yosemite for all of our great-grandchildren when they come along, so that they can come here every year just like us. So thank you for coming out, thank you for listening, thank you for supporting. Yeah, and I forgot to tell you guys what you need to do, because you are all on Team Jess. So what you need to do, donate early and often, and you can donate as little as $5 or up to $2,700. That's the limit. Feel free to donate that. And you got my CrowdPack page. I accept checks. Tell all your friends who love Yosemite and Tahoe and want to help flip a district. Tell all of your friends that we have a fresh new approach to politics here, and ask them to support my campaign. If you're in the Bay Area or Sacramento or in areas where your friends like going up to Tahoe, host a talk, host a house party. I'll come talk to your friends. I'll give them the pitch myself. Give me your networks. I am going to need lots and lots of people to call and ask for support. Volunteer your time and energy. I need all sorts of volunteers to help build websites and do videography like Nate and Raphael have just done today, to help me spell check my social media. Dear God, please help me spell check my social media. And help me write newsletters and keep organize volunteers. Come out for a week vacation to be my campaign buddy and drive me around so that I can work and get things done in the car as I drive, because the district, it goes from Fresno to Lake Tahoe. It's giant. I am in the car all the time. So I need your help on every level, and I am so grateful for all the support. Thank you all who have already donated and been so generous. And yeah, thanks for all the help, gang. We'll do it. We're gonna win this.
Thank you, Jess.
Good job.
Thank you.